Welcome. So we are so thrilled to have you all here. Some of the crowd that's here today are always here at the 9 o'clock hour to have some enrichment. Some of you are here because you're about to be confirmed, and some of you are here because you're members of the leadership of this parish. But in truth, all of you are leaders of this parish. So we're grateful to have you here. We are so honored to welcome Bishop Wendell Gibbs. Bishop Gibbs was consecrated Bishop of the Diocese of Michigan, February 5th, 2000. He has served this diocese for 18 and a half years. He has served it through some incredible moments of transition in which we've become a more inclusive and welcoming parish and a church. And I am personally honored to have had the opportunity to work with him in these last couple of years while I've been at Christ Church Cranbrook. The purpose of we ask the bishop when he comes for a visit, he gives us options of what to speak to, and the option I gave the bishop was anything he wants to speak to today. That's what he could do. So I think there's anything. I think there's nothing that I would not trust the bishop to address from a gospel-centered way, in a thoughtful way, in a way that's going to help us. So without further ado, let us welcome the bishop. And after he speaks, we'll have this roving mic, as we often do, to get your feedback.
Good morning. It's really wise when the clergy, when choosing something for the bishop to speak to, say whatever you want, because it usually ends up that way anyway. I can take any topic and turn it around to what I want to talk about. So they train you that way as bishops, you know. See, there's some people in the room who've been around long enough to know when I'm teasing, and others who know that I never tease. It's true, I have been around for 18 and a half years. In September of 1999, there was this thing called Walkabout, where those who were candidates for bishop in the Diocese of Michigan back in that day got to go around the diocese and learn a lot about the diocese, both geography and people, and ideas and concerns, and visit places. We had an extensive tour of the diocese, and you'll be happy to know that in 1999, Christ Church Cranbrook was on the tour. So I've been alerted to Christ Church Cranbrook since September of 1999. How fitting to come back on the last day of September in 2018, almost 20 years later. At that time, it seemed that everyone in the diocese, or at least a lot of people in the diocese, were a little focused on how young I was in those days. And so I got interesting questions that, well, the best I can tell you is that just to sum it up, not to give you the actual question, sum it up was, how long are we going to be stuck with you if we elect you? Now, nobody ever asked it that way, but that's what they meant. And I reminded folks that they had elected a number of bishops younger than me, and they seemed to be very happy with them. My answer was that I would stay as long as I believe God was calling me to stay here. And God and I have had a lot of conversation over the last year and a half or so, and I am firmly convinced, although there are way too many people who think I'm too young to retire, but I guarantee you I'm not, so says the pension fund, that it is time for me to move on. I will certainly miss the people a lot. Some of the faces in this room are faces that I have seen down through the years in my time in this diocese, and I will miss you. I'll even miss the Sunday visits. 20 years ago, the youth of this diocese asked me what my most favorite thing about being a bishop was and what my least favorite thing about being a bishop was. And back then and today, the answer is still the same. My most favorite is visiting a different congregation every week. My least favorite is visiting a different congregation every week. It's my favorite because I get to see the Episcopal Church, not just in the Diocese of Michigan, but the Episcopal Church as represented in this diocese across the board. From high church incense and bells every Sunday to 1928 prayer book, we still have 2 of those around, to congregations that are very broad church and very simple. We even have a few that still seem to think that the guitar is the best instrument on Sunday morning rather than the organ. And that gives me great joy because that's a great mix of what's going on across the church throughout the Episcopal Church. The reason it's my least favorite activity is that in my heart, deep in my heart, I am a parish priest. And your clergy, I think, will be able to identify with this. Being with a community every week, walking with you through the highs and lows of life, marrying you, burying you, baptizing you, being there when you're in the hospital, being there for birthdays, anniversaries, and all those intimate, loving celebrations that are part of everyday life is what brings me joy. I haven't been able to do that since I left the parish in 2000. Actually, at the end of 1999. I miss that weekly community. Every Sunday, I'm preaching to a different group of people. And on one hand, I get to say anything I want because then the clergy have to live with it after I go and take care of whatever it is I left for them to take care of. But I don't know. I don't know how it affects the lives of those that I'm speaking to. And for a parish priest, that's really hard. That's really very hard. But I've gotten over it, sort of. And for 18 and a half years, almost 19, I have learned to be more about the church at large. The church at large, by the way, according to statistics, is still shrinking. I was just with the bishops of Province 5, which is the Midwest, which includes all of Michigan, all of Illinois, all of Ohio, part of Missouri, and all of Wisconsin. It's 14 dioceses in our province. We were all together just recently, and to a person, all the bishops of Province 5 have indicated that they don't trust all of the data that's coming out about what's going on in the church. And part of that is that a number of us actually have pockets within our diocese that are growing, like Christ Church Cranbrook, like Brighton, like Lansing. We have growth happening here, and it's not getting picked up by the way the data is collected and combined. And so it looks like across the church, we're not growing. The other issue is that we still have a few clergy that don't know how to fill out the reports correctly. And so they're reporting numbers incorrectly, or, as is wont to happen during transitions, there will be a brand new clergy person, and I mean sometimes brand spanking new, just out of seminary. They know all the answers. We don't have any of those around here. But they think they know all the answers and they know how to do everything. And they go in and they recount the parish. And they go through all the records. And if they haven't bothered to spend 5 minutes looking up everybody in the congregation, they start taking people off the rolls because they haven't seen them. And so then they turn in a number that looks like the parish has gone from up here to down here, and the church is shrinking. Oh, then a year later, all of a sudden, they present to the bishop 50 new people who want to reaffirm their baptismal vows. They're not new. They're people that they got lopped off the records. Long story short, I don't trust the data that's coming out. I believe that institutional religion has a problem. But I don't believe it's shrinking as badly as we're reported to be shrinking. I think we have a reporting problem. I think the Diocese of Michigan is actually growing. And that doesn't mean we have to have more churches. We just have to fill the ones we have. And it's not even about the number of rear ends in the pew. It's about the spiritual growth of the people who are there. So if a congregation adds 5 people and 50 people realize that being part of the church, coming to church on Sunday morning, participating in programs, learning about being an Episcopalian, about being a Christian, is more important than staying at home, then we've grown substantially. And I've watched that happen, not only in this congregation, but across the diocese. One of the ways which I think we're also growing has a lot to do with our focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're having conversations in this diocese in 2018 that were considered, if not impossible, were considered anathema 18 years ago. We are seeing people in our congregations that were never there before. We are discovering populations of folks, not just ethnic populations, but other underrepresented groups who are finding our churches because they're discovering that the Episcopal Church is welcoming, really welcoming to all people. That makes some of the folks who've been around a long time a little uncomfortable. But God didn't create the church for us to be comfortable. There's a lot of discomfort in the church. And in the world. And it's going to keep happening. It's going to keep happening. That's what it's like to follow Jesus. You're going to be presented with things that you may not like a lot, but it's something we need to experience. So, that's kind of a long way around to, I'm leaving. We're in the midst of a transition. Tomorrow, I understand. I can't wait to see this. Because, well, I guess I believe it will be here tomorrow, yes. It's going to be out tomorrow. Tomorrow, the profile, that is the description of what we're looking for the new Bishop of Michigan, the profile for the Diocese of Michigan is supposed to be published tomorrow, October 1st. Which means that the opportunity for people to nominate folks or to submit their own names to be bishop opens tomorrow. Good, nobody rushed out of the room to go put their name in. I'm glad to see that. I do have a bit of advice for those who might want to put a name in, or those who might know of someone who is at the starting gate ready to put their name in. Being bishop of a diocese is not like running a large congregation. The diocese is not the biggest church in the diocese. It is a very different ministry. It is not something that you would apply for instance, like to be the president of a university or the CEO of a company. It is a calling. If it's something that people really, 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 really want, I'm suspicious. Because I really, really, really didn't want it. And I was suspicious. The last thing I wanted to do was be a bishop. But when God calls, we all have to listen. And that doesn't matter whether you are a layperson, a deacon, a priest, or a bishop. When God is calling, we must listen. And sometimes that means we're going to have difficult things to deal with. I was not convinced that I should come here until right after the walkabouts. In fact, during the walkabouts 19 years ago, I was convinced that I was not supposed to come here. I got through the week, answered all the questions. My wife and I drove home, and I said to her on the way back to Cincinnati, Ohio, "Phew, that's over. Let's go home and enlarge our kitchen." God has an incredible sense of humor. We got a larger kitchen, but it was in Michigan, not in Cincinnati. And it was a few days after that that a phone call from a priest in this diocese, simple phone call, asking a simple question, finally convinced me that I was hearing the voice of God saying, "You must go to Michigan." For two Buckeyes, that's a very difficult call to answer. My wife thought it was a joke. Whatever. We've survived. My first diocesan convention, I don't know if anybody was here for my first convention. I called convention to order, and because I have the University of Michigan and Michigan State University in the diocese, I called convention to order and said, "Go Bucks." And somebody said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, uniting the diocese around something." At least I got everybody on one side against me. That's not a bad place to start. At least everybody was together, you know. So anyway, that same voice is saying it is time to leave Michigan. It's as hard to hear this time as it was then, for a completely different reason. I will tell you, I have no idea what I'm going to do after I retire, except leave Michigan. Not for the reasons you think. I want to give my successor space to be the Bishop of Michigan. That's a little difficult to do when your predecessor's hanging out in the backyard. I know. I did that for a while. I had my predecessor's predecessor here through most of my ministry. And God love him. God rest his soul. He was a wonderful mentor. And sometimes a pain. And it would have been a lot easier if he had been someplace other than Michigan. But we got around it. I don't want to be a pain. And I don't like change. And I know some things are going to change when I'm not the bishop anymore. I don't want to see it. It's not that it's bad. Change is good. Change is inevitable. I just don't want to see it. I don't want to be faced with it every day. I don't want to come to church and at the announcements have Father Bill say, "Well, today the bishop said da-da-da-da-da-da," and I'm going to go, "Oh, really? Why? It'll ruin my whole day." So I'm going to leave. And do some other things. I'm not going to become an assistant bishop in another diocese. I'm not going to become a provisional bishop in another diocese. If I wanted to do that kind of work, I would stay here. I would stay in a place where I know the people, where I love the people, and most of them love me. I don't need to go someplace and rebuild relationship. So I don't want to do that. I want to do other things. I have some ideas. I'm talking to the presiding bishop, and we'll see. And if he doesn't like my ideas, and I don't like his ideas, then I'll just go quietly and do something else. It won't be farming. I don't like that. I don't plant flowers. I don't plant tomatoes. I don't do that stuff. I'll find something else where I can keep my hands clean. So on June 1st, 2019, we will elect a new bishop. And a year from now, it is my hope that we will have received notification from the presiding bishop's office that all the consents are necessary to allow the bishop-elect to come to the diocese and work with me for a couple of months. And then around mid-November next year, I understand that there's a party or something for the diocese to say goodbye. And that will be the end of my visiting at that point. Seems to me once everybody has said goodbye, showing up again is a little hard to do. So I think I'll just, take the rest of the time and go away. So I think it'll be a good transition. There's actually at least one person from this parish that's involved in the transition. Where did Anthony go? He went up.
Now what he's doing is he's
Okay.
getting the water ready.
Okay. Well, Anthony is on the transition committee. And I don't know how many of you, now that he's out of the room, I can talk about him. I don't know how many of you are aware, but he was put on the transition committee actually in a position for a cleric, that is, someone who is ordained. And the standing committee was so sure that he was going to make it to ordination that they asked me if it was okay for him to be put in that position. And I said, well, it's not just up to me, it's up to you, standing committee. And they said, we think it's going to be fine. And of course, just recently, the standing committee made it real, confirmed it, and have approved him for ordination to the diaconate. So, So save the second Saturday in December and come down to the cathedral so we can do that. Because I already told him that I was going to ordain him before I left the diocese. So even if I had to take the standing committee out behind the woodshed. I'm going to shut up, which is hard for a bishop to do, but I am going to shut up.
This is a time to ask questions or make comments.
God, did I really say that?
I know. I think they got to collect themselves.
Okay.
Hi, a quick question. What has been the hardest thing as a bishop and what has been the best thing as a bishop?
The hardest part of being a bishop has to do with being faithful to the vows that I take as a bishop around the discipline of the church. I think everybody who becomes a bishop hopes and prays they never have to deal with the disciplinary canons. And I've had to deal with at least 2 sets of them because they've changed during my ministry. And when you've been around as long as I have, it gets harder the more you know your clergy, because they're not just colleagues in ministry, they become friends. And I'll never, there are 2 particular moments that were most difficult for me One was 6 days after I became the diocesan, when I had to discipline my predecessor's best friend and remove him from ministry. And the other was when I had to discipline someone that I considered my best friend and had to remove him from ministry. And of course, the requisite comments from people about, well, I thought he was your friend. Why are you treating him that way? That's awful. It's nothing personal. Trust me. I still love the people. But I wouldn't be faithful to my vows if I just let it go. And I will never forget Clark Grew, who was the retired bishop of Ohio, who was the senior bishop in our province when I became bishop, was the person I called first when I had my first disciplinary matter. And he said, Wendell, the first thing you have to do is decide right now, are you going to be one of those bishops that follows your vows, or are you going to be one of those bishops that sweeps things under the rug? Because depending upon what you say will determine what I tell you next. That was really hard. Probably the best thing that happened was when I realized in talking with folks from around the church how far ahead the Diocese of Michigan is in the conversation around diversity and inclusion and equity. The work that we have done with Visions Incorporated and the work we continue to do on our own with their guidance actually has us kind of out in front of the pack in terms of the depth to which other dioceses are dealing with this matter. It does not mean, however, that we are anywhere near perfect or wonderful. It's most gratifying that we've come from a place where we didn't even want to talk about it to a place where we're kind of leading the church and others are looking to us to find out, so what are you doing? How are you doing? How did you get people to sit down and have those conversations? That's been really gratifying to me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Sorry, Sarah.
Could you talk a little bit about the growth of the church outside the United States?
Ooh.
Particularly in Africa.
Wow. Yes. The church grows incredibly well in places like Africa, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and other what we might call third world countries. And I've actually had experience in being in some of those places to firsthand see what's going on. And I don't want to diminish anything that people are doing, because I think what is happening in those places is pure gospel is being preached, and people are recognizing the need for Jesus in their lives. And that is a much easier message to get across when there's little else to compete with it. And by that I mean, in Africa, for instance, in many parts of Africa, there's nothing else to do on Sunday morning but go to church. There's no soccer games and no, baseball practice or football practice or, the 1 o'clock game at Lions Stadium or the last, thank God, game of the season for the Detroit Tigers. It's not been a good season, let's be honest. There's so much that we, in our free society, in our first world society, there's so much competition for the message of the gospel that we may be preaching the same thing. It's just that there's a lot of interference coming in. In Africa, in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, in places that I've been, there's a lot less to interfere. And so it's much easier for people to grab hold of that. And the church seems to thrive in that thing. So I don't know, we could take away all iPads, iPhones, and close all the stores and forbid sports, but we might actually make people angrier in the United States. And again, I'm not taking away from what is being preached. They're getting good gospel message. It's just that they have a lot less to compete with there. And I've seen it kind of firsthand. Yeah.
Any
Yes.
other questions? Here we go.
On a much lighter note.
Okay, so I'm a teacher,
Yes.
and I have this photograph of you
Uh-oh.
in my classroom. And it was from was it last year confirmation? And you have got, your confirmation garb on, and every child that walks into my classroom says, "Who's the man with a cool hat?" So you are a legend at Brookside. So I just wanted to let you know you bring joy to us every morning. So thank you.
There have been other teachers that have told me they have a picture of me with the hat on, and the kids figure out that I'm a bishop, and they have asked questions like, "Can he move other than diagonally?"
That's funny.
Sometimes.
Nancy had her hand up.
Where do you see the Episcopal Church in the United States in, say, 5 years, 10 years, as far as makeup, size?
If we are faithful to the loving, liberating, life-giving message of our presiding bishop, if we are faithful to our desire to be and become beloved community that is open to all, I think in 5 to 10 years the Episcopal Church will be larger, it'll be more diverse than it is today, because we are discovering that there are populations that have always been around us that we've not paid attention to. And I think that is possible because we're also beginning to work on our liturgical response to community, not by creating a new prayer book, thank you, Jesus, but by opening the process so that we can have liturgical revision and renewal that allows for material that's already here, already out there, to be incorporated into the way in which we engage community, so that it won't be odd to go into whatever congregation and see cultural mix as a part of the daily life and the weekly worship of the congregation. I think there's going to be more of that as the church grows. But we have to be first faithful to that loving, liberating, life-giving message and become beloved community, which first requires us to realize that we're all beloved by God, and then to share that message. That sounds easy. It actually isn't, but I think we can do it. We got a great leader who won't give up on that message, and he's got 6 more years to drive it into us. And a hint, I do plan to somehow help him do that, but not as a bishop of a diocese.
Hi. I find myself in conversations fairly regularly with people who are, for lack of a better term, lapsed Roman Catholics. And many times they will say to me, as I'm sharing kind of my faith and my practice, that if I was going to rejoin a church or become active, it would be in the Episcopal Church. And yet, I'm just wondering, in your opinion, or is there wording, I feel like some of the abuses and practices in the Catholic Church are preventing Roman Catholics from joining the Episcopal faith. And are there words or ideas that you have? Because I feel like there's a rich community who would like to have regular religious practice, but for some reason they just can't accept it anymore.
It's really an individual choice. In listening to some of the folks that have suffered abuse in the Catholic Church, I'm still amazed at people who were abused 25, 30 years ago, who call themselves Roman Catholic won't go to church, a Roman Catholic church, but also won't go anywhere else. And even offered to come to an Episcopal church, that's not something they're ready to do. It's an individual journey, and we have to be careful that we don't focus on increasing the size of the Episcopal Church by flinging open the doors to Roman Catholics, because there is a polity difference, and there are things that they would have to learn. And I think that many of those folks are in a place where they're not open to that conversation yet. And so I'm not sure we have the words. I'm not sure they know what the word is that they need to hear. I think the healing that they need is first. And sometimes we can help that in our conversation with them, but I don't think there's a ready-made door for them to come through.
We're going to close at this point. Bishop, we have been so enriched by all the things you've shared about being called here, and we pray for you as you move into the next steps in your ministry, and we are so grateful for all the things you've done at Christ Church Cranbrook. So thank you for being here and being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.